congregational head. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Now, if tab 71 can be brought up on the screen, that is a letter from you to the sisters about which you were asked some questions. And you have mentioned your disappointment about the ministerial statement in the first paragraph, and then talked about the irony that such allegations should be made at the same time that you were in the throes of planning a seminar with Dr. Grant about how to respond to victims of to be made at the same time that you were in the throes of planning a and that was something that you had wished to let the sisters know about the importance of being grateful to those who are bringing the allegations forward. Do you see that?
Yes.
And was that something that you adopted at the time?
Yes. We were working on that.
And you said fairly to your sisters that it did not take many seconds to establish that I had a long way to go before I could truly lay claim to such an attitude.
Yes, I couldn't ask them to be where I wasn't. We were all working on it.
Now, if tab 70 could be brought up, this is a document which is partly copied into tab 71, but it's easier to read in tab 70. And you see your handwriting at the top. It says, to the sisters. It might help you to know what is happening.
Yes.
And that is a document that you sent under cover of the letter, tab 71, that we've just seen. Is that right?
Yes.
And are these your notes as to the various responses that you made?
Yes.
Now, the second last paragraph on that page, just above the date of the 14th of the 9th, you'll see there's a paragraph there. It is our policy and the policy of the Church to respond as honestly and as diligently as we can to allegations which are made to us. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that reflect your views that you held at the time?
Yes, it did.
And you then go on to say the sisters have the deepest possible regret for any offence suffered by any child in our care. And again, did that reflect your views that you held at the time?
Yes, it did.
And you say at the end of that paragraph, should it be shown that there is substance to them, the allegations, we will do all we can to make amends. And again, is that something that reflected your views at the time?
Yes, it was a commitment we were making.
And is that commitment that you were making based in concern for the victims as well as concern for the Sisters of Mercy?
Yes.
And there was a balancing act that you needed to, as congregational leader, take on board as you move forward from this point of responding to the allegations. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in November 1996, you organised the seminar with Dr. Robert Grant, and you asked some questions about the effect that hearing Dr. Grant at the ACLRI conference had on you. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell the Commission a little about the topics covered by Dr. Grant and what he said about the importance of hearing victims who came forward?
He had had quite a lot of experience in dealing with victims and in what happens for victims. And I suppose some of the significant points were, for me, that it can take a long time for a person to get to the point where they're able to talk about their abuse and bring it forward. I also think it started me. It pushed me back to the root causes of both physical and sexual abuse as being a misuse of power, and that was a very significant learning for me, and a way of looking at that really did help me to understand better.
And so were you able then to look at the victims as people who had had power taken away from them
Yes.
And it might take them some time to regain that power to be able to come to you as the current leader.
Yes, it would, yes.
And informed by that experience at the ACLRI conference, you made arrangements to bring Dr. Grant to Rockhampton.
Yes.
Was he from the United States?
He was. He was doing some work in Australia at that time. As I recall, he was doing some work with the Australian Conference of Bishops, Catholic bishops, and with some orders.
And you sought his attendance at a 3-day seminar.
Yes.
And you say in your statement that the people who attended that were the Sisters of Mercy and personnel from Rockhampton Catholic Education Office. And just to interpolate there, that is not directly under your guidance.
Oh, no. When I was organising it, I went to Bishop Heenan and I told him that I was going to bring Robert Grant to Rockhampton, and was there any benefit for any of his people to be able to participate. He agreed to that, and so the invitation went quite widely.
And you also invited Rockhampton Centre Care, and that is the social welfare agency of the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And the priests of the diocese.
Yes.
And how was the response? How many people came to this seminar?
I don't know that we ever kept a record, but it was a big room full of people. It was held in a lecture theatre that would be roughly the size of two standard classrooms, and it was well filled. Not, I don't mean standing room only, but there was a big crowd of people there.
So
probably
the
60.
classroom holds about 25 to 30 people, perhaps.
Well, that's with desks in it, so
So
it actually was just chairs. Yes.
And was there a good turnout from the sisters themselves?
Oh yes, yes.
Did you also, forgive me if I'm wrong on this, invite the people who staffed the agencies, such as the depot, the teenage girls?
Oh yes, yes.
Service run by the sisters?
Well, any of our ministries, less relevant, you might say, perhaps in hospitals, but it is still the whole business of abuse. Well, I suppose even abuse of staff. So the question was seen as relevant to all of our people. So yes, we did try to get a good roll-up of senior people to that at least.
And was part of your reaction to your first session with Dr. Grant earlier in 96 an understanding, or a deepening understanding, that education of people within the sisterhood and within the Catholic Church in Rockhampton the key to understanding how to respond?
I felt it was terribly important. I suppose I wouldn't just feel that about abuse questions. I think if you're dealing with any issue, I need to try to acquire a decent understanding of it before I try to do too much about it. So that's what we were attempting to do, was to educate ourselves.
And why was it important to invite the sisters as well as the leadership team?
The leadership team had arrived at saying, we need to take this approach. But there was not really much point in having just 5 of us committed. We honestly needed our congregation behind us, so we needed to talk with them so that we knew that they would support us. We could have been heavily undermined if most of our sisters thought that what we were doing was quite silly or wrong or misjudged.
And what was the feedback you got from the sisters themselves in November 96 about the Dr. Grant seminar in relation to that concept that you've just described?
Oh, many of them felt that had quite shifted their own understanding of what was happening, and in particular about things like why it might take time for people to come forward. So. Now,
you made a note, and perhaps this can come up on the screen, CTJH 202 05 002 0048. And this is a document entitled Additional Information for Dr. R. Grant, and that was a note prepared by you, and you saw that yesterday. And at the top of that, you say the persons who would be attending. Now, you also had a couple of notes, and you said yesterday that you were unable to remember who the people were relating to items 6 and 7 at the bottom of that page. Thank you. Just take it down to the bottom of that first page. Now, what was, while you can no longer remember who they were, these were complaints that you had heard of second-hand rather than directly to the sisters.
Yes. I was attempting to make sure that Dr. Grant was aware of everything that had come to us at that stage. So that is the full listing.
And was that an attempt to find better ways of responding to persons who may have complaints but who have not directly approached the sisters?
A key question we put to Dr. Grant was to help us formulate the way in which we could respond. It is true there were the protocols in place, but they were around sexual abuse. They weren't a great deal of help when you came to something like, say, a letter in the paper or a boy who is saying he's got nightmares. So we needed a more comprehensive view of what was needed.
Now, if that page could just be scrolled up to the second and third paragraphs on that page, you provided Dr. Grant with the points 1 to 5 that you have set out in that page, which, and first amongst those was making the right response to the alleged victim when being the first point of contact. Now, head out in that page, which, and first amongst those was making the right response.
Yes, but it was also a point to which Dr. Grant gave a great deal of emphasis, both in his book but also in his speaking about the topic, that if a person meets with very difficult, meets with an off-putting sort of reception, it does not get any kind of appropriate response when they first come forward. Well, one effect is it's likely to re-abuse the person.
And
so, yes, I'd learnt that.
And then the other 4 points were important points, but were they ranked in level of importance from 1 to 5? Was number 1 the most important?
Well, probably just chronologically, it's the first thing that happens for a person. Well, maybe it's the most important. I didn't consciously try to put them in priority order.
But the next paragraph sets out the basis upon which those points had been made. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. And is it the case that the convictions about justice, compassion, etc., are what can ensure that the above is done well?
Yes.
So was Dr. Grant urging that justice and compassion be woven into all of the responses made by the sisters at this point?
Oh, yes. As far as I don't remember any kind of a legal approach in these days, and I don't remember a legal approach in his book at all. It wasn't about protection, it was about response.
Thank you. Now, you spoke about your realisation in '96 that ongoing education was important. Mm-hmm. Are you still of that view?
Yes, very much so.
And what is the order or the Institute doing today in order to educate its sisters and its employees in relation to responding to allegations of child sexual abuse?
Yes, we have responsibility for that woven into our documents, and we provide people to make that happen. Our senior people, anyone who comes to work for us, this is included in their orientation type of programs. So I would say it's quite integral, not just an add-on to what we try to do.
Now, just moving to another topic, You heard evidence last week from AYN about whether he had been transferred from St Joseph's directly to Westbrook, and
Yes.
whether that had been for any particular reason, etc. Do you remember that evidence that he had given?
Yes, I do.
Now, could the following document be brought up on the screen? TEN 0023 001 0004 ER. Now, Sister, when you heard that evidence, did you seek to make inquiries about whether the archives of the Sisters of Mercy held any more information for AYN?
Yes, I thought that it was as well to ask for a check to be done.
And the document up on screen, can you identify what that document might be?
Yes, it's pages from the old original register of children at Neerkol.
And it may be a little hard to read, but if we can just look at the top labels, I'll just read them out and you can tell me whether I've got them right. There's names of children, where born, when
Yes.
when admitted,
Yes.
why admitted, on what terms admitted, when discharged,
Yes.
and then to whom discharged. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, if we scroll down to number 2958, you'll see the name AYN there.
Yes.
And does that reveal that he was, according to this register, admitted 28th of July 52,
Yes.
and the reason appears to be unable to care?
Yes.
Do you have any insight into for whom might have been unable to care for AYN?
There was more than one child in the family, and so father at work unable to care
Oh, I see. And then
is a whole phrase.
unable to care children, is that right?
Yes.
So he was a state ward, and his father was unable to care for him.
That's what would have been intended by that, yes.
And it appears from this register that the 3rd of September 59 was when he was discharged from Neerkol.
That's what the records are saying, yes.
Now, I'll seek to tender that document at the end, but does that indicate to you that he was discharged from Neerkol in 1959?
Yes.
But it doesn't say anything about what might have happened to him later.
No, it doesn't.
Now, I'd like to ask you some questions about the development of the response of the sisters from 1996 onwards, when Dr. Grant was, after Dr. Grant's seminar, 1996 onwards, when Dr. Grant was a leader, came to an end fairly shortly after that, didn't it?
The 12th of December,
That's right.
1996, I'm sorry.
And Sister Diane, as she was then, was elected leader.
Yes.
And it's the case that your term came to an end under the Constitution, is that right?
That's right.
It wasn't a palace coup or anything?
No.
No.
It was just at that stage we were holding our chapters. Our 5-yearly chapter was held in September. The person to replace the current leader was elected, but the changeover was not for a few months.
Thank you. Now, after Sister Diane became leader, she appointed you the chair of the Professional Standards Steering Committee, I think as it then was, and the Professional Standards Officer until the end of July 1997. And at that point you were going to take a break, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So it was an interim period, and was part of your responsibility to set up the processes which needed to be undertaken so that what you had learnt from Dr. Grant and what you had learnt from the preceding 3 or 4 years could be structured after you left.
The approach already in train was endorsed by the incoming leadership team, and it was my responsibility to assist in that transition so that we wouldn't lose too much pace at the changeover.
Now, the first meeting on 21st of January 1997, there was a discussion, sorry, this is for the congregational leadership team, at which you were appointed
Yes.
chair. Were you at that meeting?
I attended the meeting, but of course I wasn't by then a member of the leadership team. I came in that new role, in that transitional role.
And at that meeting, the concept of Dr. Grant being invited back to talk to local doctors about receiving allegations of child sexual abuse was discussed.
Doctors and others. There was a whole program we had for him, yes.
And it was your idea to do that, was it?
Yes, we were building on what had happened in November and wanting to take the training or the understanding further. And
of course, at this point, Towards Healing had been released in December 96.
Yes.
And there was discussion at that meeting of Towards Healing and how that could fit into the allegations which were coming to the sisters at that time.
Yes, we had a formal commitment to Towards Healing. We didn't wish to cut across it, neither did we wish to delay until all of that was set up and operating.
And Dr. Grant was also arranged to provide a seminar for the Institute, which is at that point the
Rockhampton congregation, yes.
Right, so that was at Glebe, a seminar at Glebe?
Oh, sorry. That was the Institute of Sisters of Mercy. All 18 groups in Australia and Papua New Guinea had a federation of a type, but it was called the Institute of Sisters of Mercy of Australia, and we did a lot of things together.
And that was one of the things you did? Was that at your instigation?
I think it may have been. I'm not certain I can lay sole claim to that, though. There was concern among several of the leaders that we do the same sorts of things, that we educate ourselves, that we know how to respond.
And in February 1997, you went to speak to Mr. Alford. Now, who was Mr. Alford?
He was the Children's Commissioner who had recently been appointed in Queensland.
And you met with him for the purpose of compiling an action list for your Professional Standards Committee?
Yes.
And did that action list, was that discussed at the meeting of the 22nd of February 1997?
I believe it was.
And that meeting was again facilitated by Dr. Grant?
Yes.
Do you remember any specific learnings that came out of that meeting?
Well, I think it spread some of those learnings. There was discussion particularly of how to make sure that we weren't getting in the road of Towards Healing while at the same time moving on. So balancing the various sort of elements that we needed to consider and working with the diocese, I think, might have been discussed as early as that too. So, yes, we were trying to work out how to do it all.
And it was at that meeting that it was resolved that you would speak or seek to speak with Mr. Owen.
Yes, I was concerned that we still hadn't got there, hadn't done anything about that.
And was this and the later approach to AYP, did they arise out of the teachings of Dr. Grant about responding appropriately to persons with allegations?
Yes, and the processes with which his help we were getting into place by then.
Now, the leadership team was appointed in early February. Oh, sorry, not the leadership team. The Professional Standards Committee was appointed by the leadership team in early February 1997. Now, you've had some questions yesterday about the fact that a number of them were aligned with Catholic entities such as Centre Care or
yes.
There was Sister Slattery, I think. Now, firstly, did you ever observe in the way the Professional Standards Committee operated any pro-Catholic or pro-institutional bias in the way those people performed their duties?
I don't. They would have all had a concern that the Church do the right thing. I don't know that that would be a pro-Catholic sort of a stance. You know, they just needed us to get it right if we could.
Was there any focus on protecting the church
No.
against allegations?
No part of their assignment at all.
So did you take the view that it was inappropriate to have people with a link to Catholic organisations on that committee?
No, I didn't. I suppose the thinking was more that it needed to be people who understood and cared about church, but who cared about the church's mission.
Yes.
To do it well.
All right. Now, in March 1997, it became clear that there was going to be a television program on the Neerkol allegations.
Yes, indeed.
And did that make it clear to you that there might be more allegations being made about which you were not yet aware?
I thought it was very likely.
And did you take steps to put in place an appropriate response to persons who might come forward after that television program?
We had already had the problem of not knowing what to do with complaints that came to us. So we were really keen that we be able to receive these complaints as we should, and in a way which would promise to do something about them. So yes, we did pay a lot of attention to what would be the response of anyone who picked up a phone to call us at that stage.
And without taking the Commission through all the steps that you took, which is set out in your statement, is the document at tab 106, which is a news release dated the 1st of April 1997, which perhaps could be brought up, a summary of the actions that you and the Professional Standards Steering Committee undertook in that time to set up that process? You'll see the second paragraph sums up the wanted to be proactive.
We got the right
I don't
document.
think that's the right document,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I have it as tab 106, perhaps it's tab 105. It's tab 105, I do apologise. It's CTJ 202 06002 0055. I'm told it is tab 106. Yes, that's it. Now, if you look at the second paragraph of that, sister, you sent out a news release. Oh, sorry, I should say, was that you or was that Sister Diane?
Sister Diane, as the congregation leader, would have authorised it.
But that summarises the way in which the sisters wished to be proactive to responding to any allegations which they might receive directly or are aware of through the media.
Yes.
And part of the impetus for this press release was not only the reports you had received, but the reports you envisaged receiving, whether it be through the television program or later.
Yes.
And you note halfway down that the response coordinator, Sue Prosser, had qualifications as an independent social work consultant.
Yes.
And there was a commitment to responding within a reasonable time frame.
Yes.
And then there was a phone number.
Yes.
And that phone number would be available for persons to contact
Yes.
the sisters if they needed to. Now, at on that same date, there was there was a meeting of the Professional Standards meeting again on the 1st of April. Do you recall that? That doesn't come from that letter, I'm sorry, that note.
Yes, certainly.
And at that meeting, the television program was discussed. It had not yet aired or been taped even.
Hadn't been taped at that stage, if I remember rightly.
But you were aware that there were persons who had come forward to the program who had not yet contacted the sisters.
Oh, definitely.
And what did you do about that?
Well, we decided that we would put out a press release and that we would establish a phone number, that we would do those sort of things that would help us to, and also to employ a social worker who we have never put on our social workers any commitment that they respond to us. We've allowed them to work in their professional capacity, and not only allowed, we wish them to work in their professional capacity so that they feel able to deal with the needs of anyone who comes to them.
At that point, did you also reach out to the producers to seek the names of the people who would be making allegations so that you could respond to them?
I think Diane actually did that, but one of us did. Mm-hmm.
And you also approved guidelines for response, which is the document at tab, which is mentioned in the document tab 106. I won't take you to that in any detail, but the guidelines for response were an outline for how people should respond to people who rang the phone number. Is that correct?
Yes, and the idea of putting together samples of types of response is we needed to authorise the social worker to be able to make some immediate responses, not to always have to try to come just straight back to the congregation to get authority to actually do something, you know. So it reflects rather than dictates, just straight back to the congregation to get authority to actually do something, you know. So
now, was it also the case that when you or Sister Diane contacted the television program, it was requested by you that the hotline number be put up at the end of the program?
Yes, we did. I can't tell you whether we did that. No, I think we did that after the taping.
Yes, but at some point,
yes, we did.
Before the program was shown, you ensured
yes, definitely.
You ensured there was a hotline number available for persons who either made complaints to the program or had seen it and needed to contact you.
We thought that was the best way we could think of to facilitate that type of contact.
Now, after the program aired on the 14th of April 97, the hotline received about 110 calls, is that right?
In a very short time, I think 150 within the first few weeks.
And unfortunately, one of your staff was on holidays during that time?
Yes.
Because you weren't aware when the program was going to be aired?
They didn't. Well, they gave us a week's notice, I think it was, but not much.
And then you engaged extra staff
yes.
To go through the calls, and you noted the guidelines for response provided to them, is that right?
Yes, it would have been Diane authorising extra staff, but everyone was working together to try to make sure we'd do it as well as we could.
Now, just going back a few steps, on the 4th of April 97, before the program aired, you made a report to the Commissioner for Children.
Oh, yes, Mr Alford asked for a report, yes.
Yes, so it's tab 110. And that is a reasonably thorough report in the sense that it goes for 3.5 pages and sets out chronologically the actions taken by the sisters in relation to responses to the abuse. Do you recall writing that report?
Yes, I do.
And the second... the third page, page 0273 at the bottom, has a summary of the process to be followed for taking of complaints, and the second last paragraph notes. If you just go down a little bit. At the time of writing, efforts have been and are being made to seek out persons whose complaints are known to us through the media. And I've taken you to the efforts that you've made to do that, is that correct?
Yes, but a badly written sentence. It should be, at the time of writing, efforts have been made through the media to seek out persons.
And but you were actually making attempts at that point, 4th of April, to seek out the names of persons from the production company. And you've met with some of the complainants, and were continuing as the coordinator of the Professional Standards Committee. Did you receive anything from the Children's Commissioner in reply to that report?
I think there was. I think there was a letter of acknowledgement.
All right, thank you.
There was a suggestion yesterday that there were many people around perhaps to whom we might have turned. At no stage did the Children's Commissioner make suggestions about how we might seek out other information.
You were getting some assistance, though, were you not, from Mylene Carrick, who was the...
Oh, yes, she was very good.
She's the Professional Standards Officer, I think, in the Brisbane Archdiocese. Yes,
I found her very helpful.
And if I can take you to document 2 in the supplementary bundle, which is CTJH 202 08005 0265. This is a draft of the guidelines for response. And if you just go down to the next, scroll down to the heading, the response coordinator may explore with the complainant. And the question, what are you hoping for or what are you asking? And there's some notes there, which I don't think are in your handwriting, are they?
I don't think that is.
What would you like to see happen was the suggestion, and the note from the note taker was, I liked Mylene's wording and copied it down. So you were getting some assistance from those persons who were a little more experienced in this area, such as Mrs. Carrick. And was that what would you like to see happen suggestion incorporated in the final draft?
Yes, I think it was. Mylene, I remember, was very clear about the point that in her own work, she found that people who come forward with a complaint are often quite unclear at the beginning of the process about what they would like to have happen about it. So I do remember her emphasising the need to try to help people articulate, I guess.
And when the program was aired, there were about, as you've said, 110 calls. Were all of those in relation to Neerkol?
Oh, no. As far as I know, this was the first, well, it was apparently the first publicised time anyway, that some sort of church contact was out there. So quite a lot of the calls were to do with people who had been at other institutions, Catholic or otherwise. And some of them were calls of support and some of them were, anonymous calls. So there was a whole mix.
And some of them were allegations from other orphanages, I think, or other
They were, yes. And what we could, of course, we couldn't action those, but what we did do was we actually found out if they told us they were from this place in this town, we found out who was the relevant authority in that era and gave them the information they needed to get in touch with the right people.
And just for the record, Tender Bundle 84 is the minutes of the Congregational Professional Standards Committee meeting, which was held on the 22nd of April. So that was the first meeting after the program, and that sets out in paragraph 2. Again,
not the right document, I don't think.
202 08005 0371. Now, those minutes record the setting aside of the formal agenda for that meeting to discuss the response to the persons who had called. And you've dealt with, you returned a number of calls yourself?
Yes, I did.
And did you yourself, and did you instruct other people taking the calls to follow the response guidelines that have been worked out through your own committee and with the help of Mylene Carrick?
Yes.
And you noted that there were 42 of those calls which were registered as complaints in relation to Neerkol, is that right?
Yes, I think that's exactly what it was.
And you note that one of the other members of staff had been named and led to believe that charges have been laid against the one of the three who is still alive. Is that a reference to Mr Baker?
Yes.
Now, the response strategies dealing in paragraph 3, you note there, in response to our question, what people are looking for. There was a whole range of things that were set out by you as responses by those who called about what they wanted from the institution. Now, you'll see there that there's a list of items to be listened to with empathy, to have acknowledgement that it's true.
That was Mylene drawing on her experience to give us an idea of the sort of thing that she was hearing.
I'm sorry.
So
yes.
It was helping our people to understand what they might hear.
And were these some of the things that were coming up? Was this experience of Marlene's reflected in your experience of answering these calls, that people wanted a really broad range of things? There was no one response to the question, what are you looking for?
Mylene and others counselled flexibility.
Of things. There was no one response to the question, what are you looking for?
They said both that a particular incident of abuse, which can look exactly the same for two people, is not the same, because it affects each person differently, and each person has a different way of saying, this is what would help me. So flexibility we tried to build into it from the beginning.
And you talked in answers to questions yesterday about the importance of pegging support to people's needs. So part of the process must be to find out what that person needs.
Yes.
And then provide the response that they're looking for as far as possible.
Yes.
And if I can just run through a list with you of responses that have currently been made to the members, to those persons who have come forward to the Sisters of Mercy, and if you can tell me that if these are matters that have been responded to, the ways in which those sisters have responded. Firstly, and probably most importantly, there's the need for counselling. Has that been something that has been provided or paid for by the sisters? Yes.
Often it's significant to the point that it's often one of the first things we offer.
Medical and dental expenses.
Yes.
People often have health problems arising out of their childhood at an institution.
Well, even if it's not arising out of directly, it's still their current need, which they may not be able to meet in other ways.
Assistance with accommodation, either by provision of accommodation or payment of accommodation expenses.
Yes, and sometimes that's just a deposit on a unit, you know, where people just can't get that initial start, you know, they're okay then.
One of the things that has arisen out of the complaints of the lack of education is the need for skills which will help people in life, such as adult literacy classes, computer and job skills.
That sort of thing comes up often.
School fees for either the school or TAFE fees for either the complainants or their children. Transport.
Yes.
Have the sisters provided assistance with representations to external bodies, such as the redress scheme, but also
yes,
other aspects of that?
The redress scheme in Queensland, our archivist and the professional standards officer put an enormous amount of time into helping people get that and get it straight, you know.
Are you aware of the current resource coordinator providing job references for people for their employment?
She does on occasion, not as a regular thing. It's when requested. Yes.
Yes. Provision of funds for legal advice.
Yes, that has happened. Yes.
And I note in your statement you refer to payment by the sisters into people's accounts at pharmacies, or provision of, and I think one of the witnesses referred to the provision of a gift card.
Yes.
And those were the matters that were referred to were spontaneous. They weren't requests made?
No, they were just, the credit at a chemist would have been to help a person have sufficient to get prescribed medicines, but the gift cards, gifts.
Yeah. And now we've also heard about the uncertainty for a number of people who were in the institution of their family, and have you opened your archives to those who wish to know more about their family history?
It takes up quite a lot of time for our archivist, time that she happily spends, but I would see that as a very important thing to make sure. Our records are not extensive, but what is there can be very important to people. And
also, your professional standards coordinator has referred people to other organisations such as Jigsaw to find their family members.
Yes.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. And that's just an indication of some of the responses that have been made. It's not an exhaustive list, is it?
Certainly not exhausted, no.
Now, just briefly dealing with your current role as congregational leader of the Sisters of Mercy, Towards Healing has now been instituted nationally, or nearly nationally, I should say, and the sisters have adopted that.
Yes.
What is your view on the flexibility of Towards Healing? Do you see it as a rigid process or a guideline for response?
Our experience of it is that it operates differently in different states, but our experience of it is that it's quite flexible. We have our own professional standards person dialogues with the person in each of the states who's heading it up. Yes, it certainly isn't just a kind of a sausage machine approach. You know, it's certainly flexible.
No, and if you go to Exhibit 26, that's your current policy and practice in relation to children and vulnerable adults. And that will come up on the screen in a moment. And this is a policy which responds to physical, emotional and sexual abuse of children in care and forced adoptions. And those are issues which come up still?
Yes, I think those headings cover anything that we get coming in.
And the third page of that, page 3 of 6, is a flowchart which has a number of different ways of responding to allegations, to complaints which were made to the Institute, what is now the Institute, the group of congregations which joined recently. Now, that hasn't quite come up, but you're familiar with that flowchart because you were instrumental in putting it together. And I think you indicated to the Commission that you were open to improvements on it if any learnings come out of this Commission or elsewhere.
Yes.
And the three options for the appropriate pathways you'll see there, I hope that's large enough for you to read, where matters are referred to the Professional Standards Committee, for external lawyers where there's a claimant represented, and you'll see the only option there is mediated settlement.
Yes.
You haven't got contested court hearing there? Is that
no, it's not our normal approach at all. I don't think we haven't used that.
And then
we haven't got that many, I suppose.
And then you've got referral to Towards Healing or the Melbourne response, either to the Towards Healing State Office, that would be Brisbane for a Neerkol complainant.
Yes, it would.
Or to the Melbourne response if it's a complaint elsewhere.
Yes.
And in Melbourne. Then or to counselling and a mediated settlement.
Yes.
So this is the way in which the Institute, the successor to the Sisters of Rockhampton, currently deals with complaints made to them of child sexual abuse, whether historical or otherwise.
Yes.
And have you been involved in Towards Healing facilitations?
Mediation type meetings?
Yes.
Yes, I have.
And have you also been involved in negotiated settlements of legal proceedings?
Yes, I have.
Do you have a position about attending such meetings?
I like to attend where I can, but senior people in the Institute and always a sister, at least one sister, attend because we wish to be present at any of those mediations. We think it's important.
Yes, is that a part of the process of bearing witness to the complaints that come forward?
Yes, it's an ownership, I think I'd say, yes.
And have you found those attendance of the processes of which you've been valuable to your understanding of the nature of the complaints and the ownership of the sisters of those complaints?
Yes, they're valuable. I would also say they're fairly harrowing to me or to anybody else who's doing them, simply because there's an intensity of sorrow usually involved. There's
Now, you've heard the testimony of the people who gave evidence last week, and certainly your description of intensity of sorrow. Is that one you would apply to what you heard last week?
Yes, certainly.
And you heard from people, either who had not had contact with the Sisters of Mercy before coming forward to the Commission, or who had said that they needed something more. Do you recall those?
Yes, there were.
Are the sisters, through you as congregational leader, prepared to reach out to those people if they wish to take such an approach?
Yes, it would be our preference that they do.
And if they were not comfortable approaching the sisters generally, do you respond to requests from third parties, including but not limited to, of course, Lotus Place, which has an office here in Rockhampton?
Yes, our professional standards officer tries to maintain relationship with other agencies that sometimes are helping people come forward.
Just finally, Sister, as the current leader of the Sisters of Mercy, you and Bishop Michael McCarthy, the current bishop, put out a joint statement on the 9th of April, did you not?
Yes, we did.
And does that statement reflect your views?
Yes, it does.
And in that statement, you welcomed the work of the Royal Commission?
Yes, we do.
Gave it your wholehearted support?
Yes.
And you hoped sincerely that the survivors and their families may experience some healing from the opportunity provided by this Commission?
Yes.
And you renewed your heartfelt apology to those people affected?
Yes, I do.
And you extended that apology not only to the persons harmed but also to their families and to other persons who may have been harmed by their loved ones being abused. Is that a recognition by you that sexual assault, child sexual assault, is not confined in its effects to the person who suffered the assault?
Yes, I think that's unfortunately very real.
And you also refer to the courage of those who have stepped forward. Is that something you wish to acknowledge to this Commission and to the witnesses?
I have been deeply moved this week, last week, at the goodness of people who have come through very hard days, their goodness and courage. Yes.
And you also pray that the Church will continue to acknowledge its past failings,
yes,
and to
indeed.
listen with an open heart. Is that something that you hope for the future?
It's the only way we can be the Church we're called to be.
Thank you. There's no further questions.
Re-examination.
Just one matter. Sister Loch, if you were given some time to compile this information, would you be able to provide to the Royal Commission statistics on how many complaints there have been by persons alleging sexual abuse by nuns working within your congregation since 2011?
Yes, I believe I would.
And similarly, would you be able to compile statistics on how many allegations of child sexual abuse there have been by persons against nuns before 2011, when the Sisters of Mercy was a standalone congregation?
Yes, I believe I would.
So you would have
I haven't got them to hand.
Of course, but
yes,
you would have that information?
Oh, yes.
And
I'm sure
would you be willing to provide it to the Royal Commission?
Yes, I would.
Yes, thank you, Anna. And then there are just some matters to tender as a result of Sister Loch's evidence. Firstly, can I tender the annexures or attachments to document 26 or exhibit 2626, which was the policy and practice in relation to children and vulnerable adults. There are attachments 1 to 5, which are referred to in the policy.
26.27.
Can I also tender the document referred to as additional information for Dr. Grant, dated the 4th of November 1996?
26.28.
Can I tender the document dated the 31st of October 1995, which is a letter to Mr. Karp from Sister Loch, which has the written notations on it and was referred to in evidence?
26.29.
And finally, can I tender the joint statement which was released to the media by Bishop McCarthy and Sister Loch, dated the 9th of April 2015, which has just been referred to in evidence? And also, can I tender the register of admissions?
The joint statement will be 26.30.
Thank you. And the register of admissions relevant to AYN that was referred to in evidence?
26.31.
And those are the only matters arising.
Thank you, Sister Loch. Thank you for your attendance.
I just may have a couple of questions arising from the document that was just...
From the register?
That's so.
All right, Mr. Lloyd.
I might have leave. Sister Loch, I represent Mr. AYN, who's the subject of the document that's just been admitted. Sister Loch, can I ask you whether you're aware of children, primarily older children, leaving Neerkol to obtain work?
Yes, certainly.
And that included boys who remain children leaving to work on farms?
Yes.
And they remain state wards at this time?
Yes.
And are you aware what would occur if for any reason they couldn't continue working at that farm, where they would then be sent?
I really don't. I don't
You're
have
not
that
sure?
sort of detail at all, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Uh,
That would have been under the State Department.
I see.
Yes.
It's possible, though, that they may have been sent back to Neerkol?
It certainly is possible.
Okay. And Sister Loch, I take it that you didn't search this register yourself. Somebody else completed that on your behalf?
I did actually look at it myself, but it was somebody else who provided those photos, etc.
I see. And are you aware whether there was any further entry for perhaps a readmission of my client?
Yes, we did. We checked forward from there to see if there was any readmission.
But none could be found, okay.
We could see no trace of it.
I see. Thank you, Sister Loch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Loch. Thank you for your attendance, and you're now excused.
I call Ms. Catherine Diane Rowan.
Ms. Rowan, do you wish to take the oath or the affirmation? Can you raise the Bible, please, in your right hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
to the Royal Commission
to the Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Rowan, if you replace the Bible and just take a seat, please.
Ms Rowan, is it Ms Rowan or Mrs Rowan?
Ms.
Ms Rowan, you provided a statement to the Royal Commission,
I did.
and that's dated the 23rd of March 2015. And I understand that you wish to make a correction to that statement.
Yes,
And was that at paragraph 99?
that's correct.
And what would you like to correct in that paragraph?
The second last line, it refers to Mr John Shaw. He actually works for Swan McMurray and Roach rather than the firm that's listed there.
So the name of the solicitor's firm is incorrect, and it should read Swan Murray.
Swanwick, Murray, Roach.
Thank you. Other than that, is your statement accurate to the best of your recollection? I tender that statement, Your Honour.
26.32.
You joined the Sisters of Mercy in 1974, is that correct? And in 1977 you completed a Diploma of Teaching. And from 1978 until 1986 you taught in Catholic schools throughout Queensland.
I did.
And then from 1987 until 1992, and again from 1993 until 1996, you were employed as a religious education coordinator.
That's true. I was teaching at the same time. It's a dual role.
I see. So your teaching continued right through until 1996. But from 1987 until 1996, you were also employed in a different capacity as a religious education coordinator. During that time, as a teacher within Catholic schools and as a religious education coordinator, did you receive training in child sexual abuse? Did you attend any seminars in respect of child sexual abuse? Did you receive any information in respect of child sexual abuse?
No.
And what I'm asking about is, for example, how to respond to child sexual abuse. Did you receive any such information?
Not that I remember.
Did you receive any information about how you might detect signs of a person having suffered sexual abuse?
Not at that time.
So during that whole period, in your capacity as a teacher and a religious education coordinator within the Catholic school system, you received no such education on responding to or detecting child sexual abuse? Okay. Did you ever receive a report of child sexual abuse during that time?
No.
Were you ever asked any questions about it by any person?
Not that I remember, no.
And from December 1991 until December 1996, you were a member of the Sisters of Mercy leadership team, which culminated in you being elected the congregational leader in September 1996. Is that correct?
Yes, but they are two separate roles. So there were elections held for both positions. So
Right.
I was elected to be a member of the leadership team. And then 5 years later, when they had elections, I was elected to the role of leader.
And while a member of the leadership team, was there discussions about protocols being introduced in respect to allegations or how to respond to allegations of child sexual abuse?
I believe at the end of my time on the leadership team, there were discussions about the Queensland protocol, and so that was discussed at the team meetings.
And during that time, so from December 1991 until September 1996, did you receive any training about how to respond or detect child sexual abuse?
Not before the workshop with Robert Grant, which was in November 1996.
So right up into that period, there was no training provided,
That's true.
and you didn't receive any information or pamphlets or any kind of informative material about responding to child sexual abuse.
That's as far as I remember, yes.
Just to complete your involvement with the Sisters of Mercy, between 1996 until 2001, you were the congregational leader of the Sisters of Mercy,
I was.
and you left the Sisters of Mercy in May 2003
That's true.
to become a lay person.
Yes.
Now, can I just ask you about the protocols which existed during the time that you were a member of the leadership team? And I'm referring to the protocols in respect to responding to allegations of child sexual abuse. If we can bring up the document under tab 38. Do you recognise this document?
I do.
This is a protocol, the trial edition of which was introduced in June 1994. And at that time, you were a member of the leadership team.
I was.
And at that time, were there any discussions or meetings about this protocol before it being introduced in June 1994?
I believe Sister Berneice would have participated at meetings of the Queensland Leaders Conference, and that she would have provided some feedback to the leadership team at our meetings.
Do you have any recollection of that?
Not during the meetings. After I was elected the leader in September 1996, there was another meeting, and I remember going to meetings with Sister Berneice, and this document was discussed as part of that.
But that's in 1996,
Yes.
is it? After you were elected congregational leader, so from September 1996.
Yes.
But in the months leading up to this being released in June 1994, can you recall any discussion about the fact that protocols were about to be released?
I don't remember it specifically, but I'm presuming it would have happened because Sister Berneice was very good at sharing information that had been discussed.
And after it was released in June 1994, was there any training in respect of how to apply these protocols?
Not that I'm aware of.
But is it your evidence that you were aware of the protocols themselves?
I believe so.
And were you aware of that from June 1994?
I couldn't tell you the exact date, I'm sorry.
Have you had an opportunity to look at these protocols recently?
Yes, since the hearing has started, I've looked again at them.
And as of June 1994, when they were introduced, were you aware of the ethos behind them? So the principles that underpinned these protocols?
I believe so, more particularly in 1996 rather than 1994.
Well, they were called into play from your point of view from 1996, weren't they?
Certainly that was when I was much more conscious of them.
But as of 1994, did you understand as a general principle that it's best to respond to allegations of child sexual abuse in a way that doesn't adversely affect the person who is complaining of the child sexual abuse.
Definitely, yes.
So to take their allegations seriously, to respond promptly to any notice of such allegations.
Yes.
And to deal with that person with compassion and care.
Yes.
You would have understood those principles in 1994 when these protocols were released. We've heard evidence that the final draft of Towards Healing was released in January 1997, was distributed at that time. By January 1997, you were the congregational leader.
I was the congregational leader from December 1996, but I certainly was the leader in January 1997.
So you were the leader at the time the draft of Towards Healing was distributed.
Yes.
And you say in your statement that the Sisters of Mercy adopted the Towards Healing protocols shortly after they were distributed and released. How did those protocols interact or fit with the June protocols that I've just drawn your attention to, June 1994 protocols?
There were a few differences because Towards Healing was a national document,
Yes.
so it had different structures. Some of the terminology too that was used in describing people in the earlier document, they talked about a facilitator.
Yes.
That role seemed to be changed so that it became known by different terms. So there were those sorts of things. I believe the spirit was very similar and the principles were similar, but how it was expressed. There was also a lot more detail about how to respond.
But did, from the Sisters of Mercy's point of view, did the Towards Healing protocols take over the June 1994 protocols? Did you follow the Towards Healing protocols?
We certainly tried to.
Right. So they were the protocols to which you had regard after January 1997. Is that correct? If I can bring up the tab under the document under tab 115. We've also heard evidence about guidelines which started to be discussed in early 1997, but which culminated really in some principles which are set out in this document. And that document is dated April 1997. And it's, if we scroll down, it's at the end of that document. And we can see the principles and how the response coordinator may explore with the complainant or the person making the allegation of abuse. Were these principles to be followed rather than Towards Healing, or did you see the two as existing side by side?
I believe the two were side by side. Some of the information in Towards Healing is in fairly long paragraphs. It was much easier to try to summarise it so that the people who were in the situation had a fairly focused approach.
So this was really to summarise how to approach a complaint under Towards Healing. Is that a fair summation?
That was the intention.
But in effect, from early 1997, the Sisters of Mercy were following the Towards Healing protocols.
They were certainly trying to, yes.
Might just jump forward a moment. We've heard evidence about Mr. David Owen, and he's a person known to you, and that the Towards Healing processes were used in respect of his allegations of sexual and physical abuse. And you say in your statement, perhaps if I take you to paragraph 61 to begin, this relates to a Professional Standards Committee meeting of June 1997. And you say in your statement that it was agreed that Mr. Owen would be interviewed or an investigation commenced in accordance with the Towards Healing procedures, and that the person who would conduct that interview was a Mr. O'Brien.
Yes.
And to put it in its context, Mr. O'Brien was a member of the Professional Standards Committee.
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't?
Was invited to meetings as a consultant about particular things, but he wasn't a member.
So he wasn't a standing member?
No.
But you engaged him to be the investigator under the Towards Healing protocols?
Yes.
And then if we move forward to paragraph 69 of your statement, you discuss in those paragraphs, from paragraph 69 to 71, the impact of that investigation on Mr. Owen. And it wasn't a particularly successful approach in the case of Mr. Owen, was it?
It depends on how you would describe successful.
Yes. Perhaps if I put it more particularly.
Thank you.
Mr. Owen was very upset in recounting the abuse.
Yes, it was very distressing.
And in terms of Mr. Owen, you formed the view, or the Professional Standards Committee formed the view, that proceeding under the Towards Healing protocols wasn't particularly helpful in respect of his allegations and claims.
The Towards Healing protocol seemed to put a lot of emphasis on the investigation of allegations, which looks good on paper.
Yes.
But when you start talking with people about and hear their experiences, it sounds as if you don't believe them when you start investigating.
That's in the very nature of an investigation.
Yes.
Or it can be perceived in that way.
That's right. And that wasn't I don't think that was the intention, but that I think is the outcome. And it didn't seem right for someone who had such terrible experiences to be questioned and doubted and so on.
So you say at paragraph 71 that in light of that experience with Mr. Owen, you took the view that no further investigation should take place.
In that form, yes.
And was that in respect of all Neerkol victims who were coming forward to make complaints of sexual or physical abuse at the home?
We didn't use an investigator again.
And was that because of the reaction and the distress shown by Mr. Owen?
Yes.
And so you took the view that it would be best to informally assess whether a claim was valid by meeting or when meeting with a former resident.
There was some of that, but there was also other information that could be gained that was useful.
So in dealing with the complaints or the allegations, you would still make an assessment of those allegations. Is that correct?
Yes, in the general sense of that word, yes.
But it was done in a much more pastoral or therapeutic sense. So you would obtain what information you could outside of the person or independent of the person.
Yes.
And then meet with the person.
Yes.
And then make an assessment through that meeting without an investigation taking place. And was that the approach you took from that time onwards?
I believe so, yes.
Now, can I just ask you about the Professional Standards Committee and how that came into existence? And you set that out in quite a lot of detail in your statement. But the Professional Standards Committee started as the Professional Steering Standards Committee?
Yes.
And that was developed from late 1996 and over 1990, or throughout 1997?
There was a steering committee for a short period of time, and
Yes.
then after that short period of time, it became the actual Professional Standards Committee.
And that was an ongoing permanent committee. And Sister Berneice Loch was the chair of the Professional Standards Committee
She was for about 6 months, yes.
until about July 1997.
Yes.
And you say at paragraph 31 that as of the 13th of March 1997, there was a group of persons formally appointed as members of the Professional Standards Committee. If I take you to the group, so the 13th of March, you wrote to each of the following: Sister Berneice Loch, Mr Darren Holtzberger, Mr Jeff O'Driscoll, Ms Prosser and Sister Anne Slattery, formally appointing them as members of the committee.
I did.
And just in terms of the how the committee was made up, can you just briefly explain the role of each and the purpose of that role?
Of course. Sister Berneice, as with her experience in drafting the protocols, all of the research that she had done, we thought that she had the expertise and the experience to hold that role.
And she had also been the congregational leader when these allegations first came to light.
That's right.
So did you think that it was important to have some sort of consistency in that regard as well?
And continuity. We believe that Sister Berneice had a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge to bring to the role, and she was very passionate about responding to allegations in the best possible way.
And then Mr Darren Holtzberger?
He was, I believe, Deputy Director of Nursing at the Mater Hospital in Rockhampton. I hope I got the role correct, and in his role worked with many, many members of staff, and their protocols and procedures for dealing with staff training, staff code of conduct, we believed would be very helpful to the committee.
Mr Jeff O'Driscoll?
Mr Jeff O'Driscoll was a solicitor, and again, he didn't work for the Sisters of Mercy. He was independent of the Sisters of Mercy, but we believe that his experience and expertise would help us to understand what was happening in the wider community and what would be the legal and professional response to some of these issues.
And Ms Prosser, what was her role to be?
She became the response coordinator for the Sisters of Mercy, so she was a social worker, and we believed her expertise with counselling and dealing with clients confidentially would be a wonderful asset to have. She was not a member of the congregation. She was not at that time employed by the congregation until she was appointed as the response coordinator.
So she was to have a lot of contact with the persons making the allegations or coming forward to the Professional Standards Committee?
Yes.
And Sister Anne Slattery, what was her role?
Sister Anne was the deputy leader of the congregation, so at any time if I was absent, Sister Anne would be the person in that role. She had trained as a nurse and became a matron of hospitals, and then subsequently trained in social work. So we thought that she had an enormous amount of experience to bring to the role and this particular committee.
And the committee would have a lot of contact and correspondence with the leadership team, is that correct?
That's correct.
So there was much communication between the two parts of the Sisters of Mercy?
Yes, yes.
The purpose of the committee, the reason why it was formed, was to respond to allegations of abuse which had occurred by Sisters of Mercy or employees of the Sisters of Mercy. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that wasn't confined to Neerkol,
No.
but it was the matter that became the impetus for that committee to be formed.
I believe so, yes.
Now, the Professional Standards Committee continues to exist until this day.
I really couldn't tell you for the Sisters of Mercy today.
Okay. So if I can take you to tab 41. Sorry, perhaps if I take you first to your statement. After April 1997, in the formation of the Professional Standards Committee, you received a series of recommendations from Sister Loch as to how it was to be formed, and that was in about April 1997.
I believe so, yes.
And that included the protocols and the systems which would be in place for an efficient running of the Professional Standards Committee. And there was a protocol that was recommended by Sister Loch, which set out how the committee was in effect to run. And we can see that under tab 109, which set out how the committee was in effect to run. So I won't go through it in detail, but this sets out the work that was conducted by the Professional Standards or Steering Committee up until that point, and sets out the proposed protocol for its operations.
I believe so.
And during 1997, there was considerable work done by the Professional Standards Committee in responding to the allegations that had been received both before and after the 60 Minutes program about which we've heard evidence. And while you weren't a member of the committee, you were kept informed of that?
That's true. They would provide, Sister Berneice would provide either written reports for the leadership team or verbal reports and discussions with myself.
And during 1997, there was a changeover in terms of who was the response coordinator, and Ms. Margie Newton became the response coordinator.
That's correct.
And at the end of 1997, she wrote a report which you've summarised in your statement, which sets out what the Professional Standards Committee had achieved during 1997. And perhaps if I just take you to the part of your statement, rather than going to the report, at paragraph 90, which sets out those matters that had been done. Those matters that had, in effect, a summary of Ms. Newton's report. And you would have received this report as the congregational leader. And it says that there has been the employment of an independent and professional response coordinator. And who was that at that time?
Yeah.
That's Ms. Newton?
Yes, Ms. Newton's the one writing that.
Okay. So she says the committee's achieved the committee has appointed her as the response coordinator, that's right?
Yes, this was sort of a summary of what she had been doing.
Okay. And the mandate of the response coordinator to make initial contact, to maintain contact with former residents?
Yes.
So that was really in relation to the committee being proactive in that role?
Definitely.
And providing support up to $1,000? Constant communication so that after the first initial contact. It should be ongoing with the
Yes.
former residents. The close liaison with yourself, between yourself and the response team.
That was very important.
A non-identifying accounting system. What can you explain what that was?
We tried very hard to maintain the confidentiality of those who contacted the response coordinator. So if the response coordinator needed funds for a particular need of one of the people who had been at Neerkol, we needed a system in the accounts books so that they weren't named.
Yes.
It was important to say, well, this money went to this, but not the person wasn't named, because we wanted, even though the Office of the Professional Standards was part of the Sisters of Mercy, we wanted to make sure that no one else knew what was being spent or why.
And then you refer to or Ms Newsham refers to the maintenance of a current resource list. And that was persons that you could consult if you needed assistance in working out how to deal with a particular person or what they had to say about their experiences.
That was part of it. The resource list was very useful also for identifying counsellors who were helpful for the people who had been at Neerkol, because many of them lived in a variety of centres and places, and it was really useful to be able to make suggestions of counsellors. The sisters didn't ever impose and say you needed to go to so-and-so, but that many of the people who had been at Neerkol found it useful for suggestions. And sometimes they'd come back and say, this counsellor is not helpful, so the response coordinator could make another suggestion.
So you're giving them options.
Yes.
And acknowledging that what a counsellor that works for one person and is positive for one person is not for the other.
Yes.
And then you refer to the use of professionally qualified personnel in other geographic areas.
Yes.
So you're acknowledging that some former residents didn't live in Rockhampton or Brisbane, but in more regional areas.
Yes, and even in different states.
And putting them in contact with relevant persons. Yes. And then maintaining focus on the here and now needs of former residents.
Yes.
So is that a reference to matters that help them get through the day or get through the week, more immediate
Yes,
concerns?
Definitely.
And being aware of funds which could assist people in need. What was meant by that?
Sometimes the Sisters of Mercy had access to, there could be donations that had been made to them, it could be other sources of funds where they would be able to say, well, this fund would be of assistance to you, or they can arrange to assist you. So it was to try to find a variety of ways of helping.
And Ms Newton's job as response coordinator, Ms Shazansky took over that role from 1998?
Joe Menziger also had the role, so I'm not exactly sure of the timeline. I'm sorry about that. We've been very fortunate in the people that have held that role. So I remember Joe was one of the ones, and then Anne has been the fourth of them, and the most obviously long-serving response coordinator.
And during your time as congregational leader, the Professional Standards Committee continued to provide support and resources to former residents of Neerkol.
Yes, and as well as in my time, it has continued on.
Now, can I ask you now about some of the aspects of your role as congregational leader during 1997, when this response to the allegations was in its infancy?
Sure.
During that time, you received complaints about physical abuse by former nuns. And during that time, you made some inquiries of whether some of those nuns who had been spoken of as having physically abused former residents, and indeed on a couple of occasions sexually abused former residents, was still alive. And what was the reason for those inquiries?
We really needed to know how to respond, and so it was important to know whether the sisters were, if they were still involved in a ministry, what would be the appropriate response, who to talk to, if there'd been an allegation. So that was the basis.
And you say at paragraph 55 of your statement that your inquiries revealed that none were in active ministries with children.
That's my understanding, yes.
So the first reason for one of the main reasons for the inquiry was to see whether these nuns who had been named as perpetrators were still working with children. Is that correct? And your inquiries revealed that none that you were aware of were still in active ministry.
In an active ministry with children, yes.
And what do you mean by active ministry? Can you just explain that?
I suppose there would be some that would have been working as volunteers.
Active ministry. Can you just explain that?
I suppose most of them, the sisters would have a designation of retired or in active ministry, so many of them were retired sisters who would work as volunteers.
You also say at paragraph 55 that sisters who when younger were feared by students mellowed a lot with age, and it did not seem there was any danger in them continuing in their limited ministries. Can you recall what that referred to? So were there a number of sisters who were still working with children?
I don't believe that there were continuing in their limited ministries. I don't believe that there were very many, so I can't give you the specifics. I was just conscious that, say if they were visiting hospitals or making pastoral care visits, there might be children or things like that, but that my experience of the sisters, even the ones who had allegations had been made, was that they were not threatening individuals or in their old age.
So can you provide any more specifics than contained in that paragraph? In particular, can you recall how many sisters were still alive and working with children? When I say sisters, I mean sisters who had been named as perpetrators of physical or sexual abuse. Can you recall whether your inquiries revealed that any of those sisters were alive?
On the list of the sisters who were named initially, I thought there were 3, 4 or 5 who were still alive, so approximately.
And did you make contact with each of those sisters?
I spoke with the sisters, yes.
And were any of those sisters who were still alive and you made contact with, were any of those sisters working either in a volunteer capacity or employed, having contact with children?
I don't believe so.
And what was the age group of those sisters?
I believe they were all perhaps in their 60s or 70s, perhaps 70s or 80s. It's hard to tell.
Okay. And did you make a note of the names of those sisters? And did you advised them of the allegations that had been the allegations that had been made against them?
I did talk with them about some of the allegations. I tried to be very careful not to name who had made the allegations. I really wanted to protect those who had made allegations.
And did any of those sisters to whom you spoke, did they want to become involved in the protocols or the Towards Healing protocols or the apologies that were to come? Did they want to play a role in that?
Not at that time. I don't think they were as familiar with the Towards Healing protocols.
Did you invite them to become involved in that?
When there were later requests for meetings with sisters and apologies, I certainly talked with them then.
In particular, later on, and we might just jump forward to that now, in particular, later on, there was a request on behalf of one former resident to meet with one of the sisters who you knew to be alive.
Yes.
And that meeting was coordinated by yourself in conjunction with the Neerkol Action Support Group.
The request was forwarded to the sisters from Mary Adams, who was the secretary for Neerkol Action Support Group, and the response went via Mary as the secretary.
And that was for Sister Mary Pius to meet with AYN?
St. Pius.
And were you present for that meeting?
I was.
And was that meeting, how did that meeting progress? Can you describe how that went?
In general terms, yes. When the requests had come for meetings with between the sisters and those who had been at Neerkol, I spoke with John Britton, who'd been the mediator of meetings with the sisters, with myself and other residents from the Neerkol Action Support Group. And he recommended Peter Conliffe from the Alternative Disputes Resolution Branch.
Yes.
And Peter gave me a lot of good practical advice. And he had said that as he would recommend that such meetings required very careful preparation and a skilled facilitator. And so he recommended Mary Ann Dredge. Mary Ann Dredge contacted me, and we also she contacted AYN. I believe that she met with AYN before, and then she met also with myself and Sister Mary St. Pius in preparation for this meeting.
And did AYN respond well to the meeting from your point of view?
My memories of the meeting was that he was very grateful for Sister to be part of that meeting, and he appreciated the time to talk about his experiences with Sister.
Mm-hmm. And apart from this meeting between the Sister and AYN, did you organise any other personal apologies by former sisters who'd been referred to in complaints with former residents?
I didn't. Sometimes there was there was a letter of apology from a sister to another resident, and I know that Sister St. Pius, prior to this meeting with AYN, had also met with another resident from Neerkol, but I didn't organise that one.
And apart from Sister Pius, were you aware of any other meetings, any other former sisters or nuns who met with former residents?
Aware of any?
Did any sisters express a reluctance to do that you're aware?
Many of them were very anxious and very nervous. Sister St. Pius was very anxious and very nervous prior to the meeting as well.
Apart from Sister Pius, did you contact any other, or are you aware of any other sisters having been contacted by the Professional Standards Office in respect of meetings with former residents?
I did speak to other sisters, yes.
And did any of those sisters express a reluctance to meet with the former residents?
Yes.
Can you recall the names of those sisters who expressed that reluctance?
I remember one of the sisters.
And did one or more than one express reluctance?
I can only be clear about one sister that I spoke with.
And what was the reason for that?
Some of them, their big concern was that because the incidents had happened so many years ago, that they wouldn't remember it. And again, they felt how terrible this would be for someone to tell of something that had made such an impact on them, and for the sisters to say, I'm sorry, I don't remember the incident, or I don't remember you even. And so they were very anxious about that. Some are also very anxious about being defensive. You know, what if so-and-so says this and I react in that way? I genuinely believe they did not want to cause any more hurt to the people that had asked for apologies. They were happy to apologise, but sometimes if you can't remember the specifics, it doesn't mean as much.
Rowan, did the sisters that you spoke to, who were present at Neerkol during the time of some of these residents' experiences, did they say anything about the general culture of Neerkol at that time?
Yes.
And did they acknowledge that physical punishment was used in respect of residents at the time? Yes. And did they acknowledge that the physical punishment could be excessive on occasion?
Yes.
And that it involved the use of, for want of a better word, instruments or canes or some sort of implement? So that was acknowledged by the former sisters? Yet, is your evidence that their concern was that they wouldn't recall specifics within that?
Yes. I remember having one conversation with a sister, and there was an incident that one of the children at Neerkol had shared, and it was a very graphic incident. In talking about that with the sister, she had no memory at all of it.
Did that sister agree to meet with the resident?
The resident didn't actually ask for a meeting with the sister.
Was there any other reason given by the sisters who'd been there and against whom complaints had been made? Did they give any other reason for their reluctance not to meet with the residents?
I think that was the main reasons were that trying to remember what had happened, and not being able to respond appropriately to what was said.
And during the time that you were dealing with the former sisters and the residents in this regard, was that made quite clear to the former residents, the reasons why some sisters did not wish to meet?
It was a little difficult to do. I certainly did speak with at the Neerkol Action Support Group meetings, but again, sometimes the people that had put requests weren't at those meetings.
Yes.
So it was difficult to communicate to the person. Sometimes they would make the request of the response coordinator, and again, so it was hard to work out the best way of responding.
I now come to the Neerkol Action Support Group. That was formed in early 1997, and the Professional Standards Committee and also the leadership team had contact with the Neerkol Action Support Group throughout 1997 and indeed in the years that followed?
It was about, I think, June 1997 that we actually had a meeting with them.
But you were aware of the group before that, or shortly before that?
Yes, then I think it was in May 1997, there was an article, I think, in the Courier Mail, which talked about the formation of this group.
And your first meeting with the Neerkol Action Group was on the 18th of June 1997?
That's right.
And what flowed from the meetings in June and July 1997 was there was discussion of both an apology and compensation. Is that correct? And on the 15th of July 1997, at the second meeting, the Sisters of Mercy provided funding for the Neerkol Action Support Group to operate.
Yes.
And there was also discussion about a draft letter of apology.
Yes.
And that letter, or a draft of that letter, was given to the Neerkol Action Group on the 14th of September 1997 at the meeting at that time.
My memory would be that at the second meeting of the Neerkol Action Support Group, I think I tabled a draft apology.
Yes.
And at that meeting, the response to that first draft was, I think they were disappointed and believed it could be said in much better words.
And it was at the meeting of the 14th of September 1997 that what became the final draft was given to the Neerkol Action Support Group.
Yes, before that meeting as well, there had been quite a lot of communication between the Neerkol Action Support Group and myself.
Yes.
And even before that meeting, I did send the next draft to them. So they had a meeting of the Neerkol Action Support Group members.
Yes.
So that it was talked about before we met with them in Brisbane.
And if we bring up the document behind bring up the document behind tab 157. This is a letter written and dated the 25th of September 1997. And that is signed by yourself?
Yes.
And that is the apology, the final draft of the apology that was provided.
Yes.
And in providing that apology, it was circulated to numerous media outlets.
First of all, to the Neerkol Action Support Group. And they, Mary Adams, as the secretary, did a lot of hard work. The sisters didn't actually have contact details for many of those who were in the Neerkol Action Support Group. So I signed about 70 copies, which Mary Adams was kind enough to distribute. Then after we had distributed those, we also sent copies to other people such as Mr. Alford and eventually to the media as well.
This letter of apology was endorsed by Bishop Heenan and the diocese publicly.
Yes.
And up to September 1997, Bishop Heenan or a member of the diocese had not been present at the Neerkol Action Support Groups at which you had been present.
That's correct.
And we've heard evidence that Bishop Heenan was invited to a meeting in August 1997 but couldn't attend because he had other commitments, and then first attended on the 2nd of December 1997. Were you present at that meeting in December 1997?
I was.
Looking back to the period between June 1997 and December 1997, did you discuss as the congregational leader of the Sisters of Mercy with Bishop Heenan whether he should attend these meetings? Did you have any discussions about that?
No. I remember when my memories are that the Neerkol Action Support Group, and with John Britton's advice, it was easier to deal with one issue, one group, one hope first. So they really wanted to talk with the Sisters of Mercy. They really wanted an apology. They wanted to know the support the sisters could provide. They wanted to then move on to discussions about compensation. And it was easier to deal with those issues. I think AYD in his statement also talked about that was his recommendation as well. I was very supportive of the invitation going to the bishop and tried to also be encouraging and to say I had found the meetings very worthwhile. Difficult, especially for the people who had been at Neerkol to meet with a Sister of Mercy again after all of these years, but very, very worthwhile. So I tried to be reassuring and to say I thought there was great benefit in these meetings.
So prior to August 1997, do you recall any discussion about inviting Bishop Heenan to attend these meetings?
Don't. There was, I think, a comment in the notes of the meetings at one stage of the race when the sisters had their apology and they thought, this is good now, we just need to move to the next stage and have an apology from the diocese or the bishop.
So in your mind it was a two-step process?
Yes.
And then between August 1997 and December 1997, when the bishop did attend, do you have any memory of any discussions directly with the bishop about attending these meetings?
Not specifically, apart from the general update and information that I would have shared.
And you recall being encouraging of him to do that?
David, if you're about to change topics,
Yes, I am, Your Honour.
we'll take the mid-morning break now. So we'll take 15 minutes.
Silence will stand.